Our next session, I'm excited to share with you, is a presentation by Andrea Cohan, Computer Science Education Marketing Lead, and her talk is titled Discussing K12 Consumer Science Education Equity Research from Gallup and Google. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea Cohan, and I'm really excited to be here today. So I lead computer science education marketing at Google, which means that I support intro to coding programs for students in the US, amplify google.org grant announcements, and fund and distribute research that work to close equity gaps in CS education. So why computer science education, you might be asking yourselves. Well, as some of you know, jobs in CS are currently outpacing the rest of the sectors combined, and yet not everyone, especially Black and Latinx students, have the same access to those learning opportunities as their peers. And of course, as an organization full of computer scientists, we feel like it's our responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to coding or CS education learning opportunities. Google has started several programs to introduce more students to code, from a video-based curriculum in elementary school to an app for older students that teaches them to code via game-like challenges. And in addition to programs, we support the community of CS education advocacy nonprofits and researchers in the extremely critical work that they do to create new policies, curriculums, and ensure that equity is at the center of CS education. Finally, we fund research that better helps the entire industry understand what's truly happening in CS education. And today, we'll be focusing on that part of our CS education work. The latest study is a new report in a multi-year partnership with Gallup that looks at diversity in K12 CS education. When we first released the findings back in 2015, this was basically the first report of its kind. It influenced Obama's CS for All initiative and actually is often still cited today. So as you're listening to the most significant findings, I hope you get inspired to take a look at the full set of reports on the Google Gallup site. There are several recommendations and implications this research has, and regardless of your role in the CS ecosystem, we can all take steps to ensure more students feel confident about even trying to code. So I'd like to share the most significant findings in this latest report. So we created a presentation to help those advocacy partners, nonprofits, use different statistics in their own reports when they're trying to get new policies created. We saw that this was something that they needed. So I'm going to be going through this deck. This is also on the Google for Education website. So there were some significant takeaways in this research, and I'll just be touching on the top highlighted takeaways. But there's many, many more, so I definitely encourage you to take a look at the research when you can. But for starters, the significant gender gap that existed in CS education perception since our 2016 report continues to exist. So when we dig a little bit deeper in here, it turns out that about 4 in 10 students are at least somewhat interested in learning computer science, and that interest is substantially less common amongst girls than boys. You can see more data here about the differences in confidence, belief that it's very important to learn CS, and expectations around pursuing a job in CS between boys and girls. Interestingly enough, this gender gap is also represented in the feelings of the students' parents and guardians toward their children. So what does that really mean? Parents and guardians of boys are more eager to have their child pursue a career in computer science than parents and guardians of girls, actually. So moving from gender to race disparities, there are similar CS education access gaps in between white, Black, and Hispanic students since we first ran these reports in 2015. So for example, in 2016, 47% of Black students said that their schools offer a class at school dedicated to CS. Well, 58% of their white peers said the same thing. And in 2020, you can see that gap has lessened by a little bit, but generally every single population's response to this question has actually decreased a little bit as well. So we still see that gap there. When we asked if students had learned any computer science, 70% of white students said they had, 65% of Black students said they had, and 66% of Hispanic students. So moving into the sector of schools versus superintendents and the whole kind of formal classroom environment, it does seem that since 2016, we have made positive progress in terms of state level CS decision makers believing that CS is important, but that hasn't translated into the classroom quite yet. So in 2020, nearly 6 in 10 superintendents agreed that computer science is currently a top priority in their districts. In 2016, that number was 33%. So definitely a big jump there, which is great news. But there's that disconnect between administrators and teachers and principals, in that 18% of public school teachers and 28% of principals say computer science education actually gets that top priority at schools. When we talk to different teachers and different in-classroom adults, we hear that sometimes what's happening is that they often need to teach to a specific set of standards that the students will be tested on, and often computer science is not one of them. So while they do see computer science as super engaging, as something that promotes a growth mindset in students, they feel like they don't have the time during the day to actually introduce that, given everything else they have to do between math, science, and ELA. So interesting insights there. 32% of teachers agree that their school boards are committed to offering CS in their schools, while 43% of principals and 52% of superintendents agree as well. So you start to see that disconnect there as well. There might be, in many states actually, there are CS standards and CS curriculums, but we're not really seeing that trickle down to the classroom for maybe the reasons that I explained. There's several other reasons too that this could be happening. Also, students are generally unconvinced that CS is important for them to learn, highlighting a critical need for interventions from every stakeholder to provide information and to specifically encourage girls to take CS courses, and to provide them with information around how CS can actually help them meet their goals, whether or not they're interested in actually coding. Again, when we talk to educators here, we hear them say students can't really make the jump between sitting behind a computer with zeros and ones and how that gets them to things like create art or create a website, or how they can actually look at environmental problems or community problems and create solutions to those with coding in CS. So we all have a better job to do around talking to students around how computer science can actually help them fulfill their goals, no matter what those are. So a little bit more into the gender gap around CS importance when it comes to students. 49% of boys say CS is important for them to learn, while only 31% of girls. So everything we've been talking about around making sure CS feels relevant to students feels even more important to make sure young female students are understanding. However, if girls and boys report they spend at least an hour a week studying CS at school, they're both more likely to say that learning CS is important. And this was true whether it was an hour of computer science education alone, like in a tech classroom, or digital skills. This also was true if that hour of CS was in a more standard core subject, such as math, English language arts, or science. And this is also true for all of the different ethnic groups or different races, so across white, Black, and Hispanic students. So those were the main takeaways or the most significant findings of the research. There's a lot more, including some differences between small town schools and the community members in those versus the larger school districts. Again, and that's also split out by race. So the bit.ly link here takes you to a blog post actually running through these significant findings, but also includes links to all of the different reports. So take a look there. Additionally, I didn't touch on this in the beginning, but this report was survey based, and most of those surveys took place online. Around 7,000 students, parents, guardians, educators, and school district leaders participated. So take a look at all the reports. The conference organizers have my email address. Please don't hesitate to send me an email if you have any questions. Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person.